So these are going to be some of the key points I discuss in this video for half ohm daily drivers. I'm pretty much a daily driver and I'm pretty much running almost full tilt on my setup. So thanks for watching. I hope y'all enjoy and be sure to subscribe, comment, and like as y'all wish. Thanks guys. What's going on guys? This is Jacob Viral. Figured I'd make a video about half ohm daily driving. So I run my amps at half ohm each. They're strappable, so strapped at 1 ohm. After rise I see about 2.5 ohm. That's pretty much minimal, so that's still right at 1 ohm for after rise. So what I wanted to discuss was some of the things that I've noticed running at half ohm daily, because I am a daily driver. So thermal heat is a big part of the way amplifiers run when you're running at a lower impedance ohm. So I actually installed some fans. I only have 2. You can install more than that depending on what your amp setup is. Sometimes people install amps on both left and right side as well. So thermally, the heat on these amplifiers, I have SoundCube amplifiers, but in general amplifiers will get hotter when you run it at a lower impedance. Just because you run at that lower impedance doesn't mean that's what amperage you're going to see. But for me, my amplifiers actually started cutting off a few times before I added the fans in, because they would get really hot. And when I say hot, meaning you can actually touch the amp and you can feel it actually burning your skin almost. That's how hot they would get. And that was me running full tilt, almost clipping for 10-15 minutes at a time, and the amplifiers get really hot. So daily driving, whenever I would drive, I drive maybe 40-45 minutes one way to school or work sometimes, and my amplifiers usually stay pretty cool now because I got good electrical on the highway. But in the idle, my amps are seeing low 12 voltage range, so usually when you get in the low 12 volt range, like 12.3 to 12.6, that's when you start to see a little bit more heat coming into play with your amplifiers. If you're going into like the 10s and 11s, your voltage, then that's really dangerous on half ohm, especially for daily driving, because you're really straining your inside parts. I don't know much about the guts of the amplifier, but I know just an experience of actually doing the amplifier, using them on a daily basis, understanding that where my limits are with my system. I'm not going to sit there full tilting all day, non-stop, 6-7 hours in idle, where I know my electrical can't keep up with that. So anyway, second thing I wanted to mention was amplifier actually cutting off. So I mentioned earlier, my amplifiers do cut off when I had the heat issue. Outside of that, I've never had a cutoff point. I know my amps where they ran. They're wired at half ohm each, strapped. So I have 1 ohm per set, and I have 2 sets of these amps. So my amplifiers didn't cut off because of actual wiring below impedance reading on the amplifiers. It cut off because of heat. So that's thermal, pretty much thermal capacity. It meant that the amplifiers turn off after a certain point. It only cut off from that. I also had a vibration issue when I first installed the amplifiers. I fixed that. So that was another reason that caused them to cut off. So amplifiers cutting off, that all depends on the manufacturing pretty much of your amplifier, depending on what brand you get. So another thing I wanted to mention, gain matching versus strapping. So when you strap your amplifiers versus gain matching. If you're running 2 amps, 4 amps, 6, is it better to gain match or is it better to strap when it comes to daily driving? I would probably say most setups, usually if they're running, most setups people don't run more than 2 amps. But if you are, I would definitely recommend strapping your amps instead of gain matching. That way you get more efficiency out of it. Because your amplifiers are running together, they're working with each other. I ran all 4 amps, 1 per sub for my setup if you've seen the videos, and I noticed that maybe a little bit of a difference in the actual output you get between each amp. Once I clamped on my rise and my watts out of each of my subwoofers, it would get a little bit of a difference than when they were actually strapped. So definitely I would strap them. It's a little more efficient. It's a little more less of a variance you'll get with your amplifiers when you strap them versus gain matching them. You might get a little more when you gain match, set them 1 amp per sub, the way I do it before, but in the long run I would say it might be a little more strain because you're getting a little less rise. So depending on your rise is what you got to battle with there. Fourth thing I want to mention was clipping and distortion. So a lot of people might think, well, my amplifier might clip or distort a lot easier. That is true, because your efficiency lowers as you lower your impedance on your amplifier. But depending on your rise, wiring down isn't going to be an issue. I wired mine down to half ohm. I started at 2 ohm strap, at 2 ohms, so I'd get 1 ohm per amp, and I noticed a huge difference in my loudness and my actual where I could reach with my system just by wiring below impedance. Noticing that when you're wiring at your normal 1 ohm, sorry it's a little loud, I'm doing this at the house. Wiring at 1 ohm with the amplifier, I noticed that I wasn't getting the most out of my system. And that's another point I have here, is noticing that when you're wiring at half ohm on a daily driver, it might be dangerous, but if you have the electrical to par up with your setup, and you're able to keep your voltage in the 13 to 14 volt range when you're playing, and you're not dragging the system out on your amplifier and dogging it out, not clipping and distorting, then you should be fine. But going back to the question I mentioned, clipping and distortion, I don't really see a lot of that going on a lot with that, but it also varies on your amplifier and where you got your gains set at. Another thing, Korean and Brazilian. I've ran both. I've had Teramps and I've had Soundcube. Soundcube's just Brazilian board, not Brazilian, a Korean board, and Teramps is a Brazilian board. So I would say Korean if you're going to run half ohm. Don't run Brazilian half ohm. I'm sure everybody's seen all this, the politics on Brazilian boards going on fire. That's just because they're made for 1 ohm or up. They're not made for you to clamp anything under that. They're not even made and rated for that. That's why most manufacturing warranties in Korean boards as well are not made for under 1 ohm. So it's okay to wire under 1 ohm, especially if you're accounting for that rise. But as a daily driver, you won't have that issue if you can keep up with everything I mentioned earlier. 2 more points I wanted to mention, guys. So you get a lot more bang for your buck financially. To me, I think I would prefer that. You definitely want to make a lot more, benefit wiring at half ohm. So at a daily driver, I've never had the issues, as I mentioned earlier. I keep fans on them, keep airflow. I'm not dogging them out, running full tilt for hours at end, and I have no issues. Amps don't cut off, and I get a lot more out of my buck. So before I was clamping 4,000 to 5,000 watts out of my system when I ran it at 1 ohm per amp. So now I'm getting about 9,000 watts. So a couple of thousand more watts more extra on my system. Same amplifiers, same electrical. I just dropped my voltage drop, maybe 0.6 difference, almost double in power. So going from 1 ohm to half ohm on the amps, double power. I mean, that's a win-win. So definitely run half ohm. You're getting your bang for your buck as a Korean amplifier. So definitely wire half ohm if you can do that. You get more bang for your buck. That way you can get rated out of your amplifier. You're not going to get that at 1 ohm. Most amps, say you got a 1,000 watt amp, you might get 600-700 watts max, because after rise, you're still going to see less than your watts. Wiring at half ohm, you'll see a lot more out of it. Alright, now my last thing I wanted to mention is electrical needs. So going from a 1,000 watt amp, let's just use my case scenario, 4,500 watt amp. Electrically, if I ran this at 1 ohm, I would probably only need like a 200, 220 amp alternator, and one group 31 in the back would be fine to get into mid 12s. But if I ran it at half ohm, I would probably need to double that. So I'd have to add a second battery in there in order. So right now I'm running 6 group 31s and another group 31 up front plus a 350 amp alt. That's not enough for me, but to keep my voltage in the 14s full tilt. But for daily driving, I know where my limits are, so I don't go anywhere below, pretty much nowhere near clipping mode for any of my music. So I know I'm not dogging the amps out, and I still get pretty clean efficiency out on amplifiers. So basically, to sum this up, daily driving, full tilt is okay, half ohm, but I would definitely recommend keeping your gain a little less at full tilt than full tilt, and your daily driving will be fine. Just ensure you have the proper electrical. Ensure it's a Korean board, not a Brazilian board. Ensure you have the electrical, and ensure that you have the proper settings on your gains and your amplifier is ran properly at that ohm rating. You don't want to run your ohm reading down to quarter ohm or 1.25 even, or something like that. Then you won't benefit, or it might hurt. So running too low of an ohm can damage your amplifier depending on your rise. So definitely account for rise when you do that. And running at 1.25 ohms fine. That might not meet the minimal for the amplifier, but if you can wire it down, then definitely wire it down. You'll benefit more from a Korean amplifier. So I have a few points I pointed out today for this video. Let me know if y'all got any questions, or for daily driving. I drive this vehicle for weeks at end. I've driven three, 4 times a week at least, minimal, a couple hours, and I'm jamming my system, and I have never had any issues riding at half ohm on my setup. So if y'all have any questions about half ohm driving, just let me know, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't. I hope I've answered some questions. Feel free to comment if y'all have any ideas or suggestions or anything else you want me to mention or discuss about riding the half ohm. But half ohm riding, daily driving is not an issue. Just make sure you have your stuff up to par like I mentioned throughout this video. So, Jacob Varl out. Thanks.